I'm asking anyone that knows anything about my granddaughter, please contact the police department. She's been missing for a very long time.
When the last time you been up to your daughter's school? I said, my daughter's school. I said, I don't even know what school she go to. I said, I've been looking for her. And they looked at each other and I was like, what's going on? They said, your daughter's missing.
Police may be closing in on a suspect in the case of missing 13-year-old Neziah Harris.
The 13-year-old disappeared. It was back in January. And then Detroit's top cop is now vowing that this case has not gone cold. Meantime, we have learned Neziah's father has passed away. Jacqueline Francis is talking with a close friend of the family about where things stand tonight. Jacqueline?
Karen, as we told you yesterday, a warrant request has been submitted to the county prosecutor's office. Now, police can't say who they're looking into, but they did say to expect an update soon.
On a cold January afternoon in Detroit, a 13-year-old girl stepped off her school bus a few blocks from home. She never made it through her front door. It would take more than 2 years, days of courtroom testimony, and the man's own guilty plea before her family got even part of an answer. And when that answer finally came, the one thing they needed most was still missing. She was. This is the case of Neziah Harris. How a child vanished on an ordinary school day, why a written warning that reached police 2 years earlier was never acted on, and what justice means when the courtroom closes but the search does not end. Everything you are about to hear comes from court proceedings, official statements, and verified news reporting, current as of early August 2026. Neziah Harris was 13 years old. She lived on Detroit's East Side and was a student at J.E. Clark Preparatory Academy, a school in the city's public school district. On the afternoon of Tuesday, January 9th, 2024, she rode her usual bus home and got off near the corner of Cornwall Street and 3 Mile Drive, a stop she had used many times before. It was the last confirmed sighting of her. The next day, her family reported her missing. What began as a missing person case would become a homicide investigation, a criminal prosecution, and a public reckoning over ignored warnings. And it would leave behind a search that continues to this day. To understand how, you have to start before January 9th. You have to start with who she was and who was already close to her world. The public record about Neziah's life is limited, and this documentary is not going to decorate it. But the people who loved her did leave a picture. Her grandmother called her a very sweet child. A longtime family friend remembered a fun, loving girl, a kid who talked about ice cream trucks and riding her bike. She had a routine, the kind that makes a family feel safe. School in the morning, the bus in the afternoon, the same stop, the same short walk. Home by a predictable hour in a house full of relatives who expected her. Later, in a courtroom, a judge who had heard days of evidence would describe a harder truth underneath that routine. Several people failed her, the judge said. In her words, Neziah was forced to live in a home where she was not protected or given the adequate attention and love. That finding came with 2 years of hindsight. In early January 2024, what the outside world could see was a 13-year-old with a bus route and a family that expected her home. One child in a city where, as local reporters would later point out, the list of missing people was long enough that the police department itself struggled to put a number on it. Because here is the part of this story that was hiding in a filing system. The danger had a name, and the system had been told. Go back to April 2022, almost 2 years before Neziah disappeared. That spring, Michigan's Children's Protective Services received a complaint about a man named Jarvis Butts, a Detroit resident, then in his early 40s, connected to Neziah's extended family. According to an investigation by Detroit television station DBWXYZ, which later obtained the records, the complaint described an incident at a birthday party where a child accused Butts of sexual abuse. and it named Nazia Harris as a victim as well. CPS did what the process calls for. It generated a law enforcement notification, an LEN. That is a formal alert forwarded to the Detroit Police Department, flagging possible criminal conduct that may warrant a police investigation. By the department's own later account, it receives more than 5,000 of these notifications every year. This one reached Detroit police in April 2022. And then, as far as Nazia was concerned, nothing happened. According to WXYZ's reporting, only the other child named in the report was ever interviewed because of how the form's victim field had been filled out. Nazia's name was on the page. No investigator ever reached out to her. Her great-aunt, who says she filed the original complaint, later told reporters the police had everything they needed. Either they didn't read it, she said, or they didn't comprehend it. A retired Detroit police lieutenant reviewed the document for WXYZ. He counted at least 2 allegations of sexual assault visible on the page, maybe 3. His conclusion was blunt. Somebody, he said, dropped the ball. Years later, and Assistant Detroit Police Chief acknowledged the failure on camera. "We could have done better," he said, no question. He described what has changed since. Notifications are now triaged and assigned quickly, and everyone identified in a report is interviewed regardless of which box their name appears under. Hold on to the size of that gap. In April 2022, a document inside the Detroit Police Department said a man was sexually abusing Nazia Harris. In January 2024, she got off a school bus and disappeared. What happened in the 21 months in between is what prosecutors would spend the next 2 years reconstructing. Their reconstruction begins with a pattern. According to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, Jarvis Butts targeted and befriended women in order to get close to their young daughters. Prosecutors would publicly call him a classic and expert groomer. That characterization did not rest on one case. Butts had a prior conviction for sexual assault dating back to 2005. And prosecutors would eventually charge him with sex crimes against 5 girls between the ages of 4 and 13. Among them, according to the charges, an 8-year-old relative. As for Nazia, prosecutors alleged the abuse began around 2022, the same year as the warning when she was 12. This documentary will not read the recovered messages between them aloud, and it will not show them. The court record describes their substance plainly enough. A man in his 40s exercising emotional and sexual control over a child. Every claim in that paragraph was an allegation when it was filed, and the wording matters. Keep that legal status in mind, because the story is about to reach the day the allegations turned into a search. January 9th, 2024, a Tuesday. Nazia went to school that morning like always. At some point during the day, she took a photo of herself, smiling, mid-wave at the camera. It is the last picture of her that exists. That afternoon, she rode her bus home and stepped off near Cornwall and 3 Mile Drive. Somewhere between that corner and her front door, the record goes dark. One more documented fact sits on that date. According to prosecutors, January 9th was the day Jarvis Butts had originally been ordered to surrender to authorities on a separate gun charge. The surrender date had been pushed back to February. That afternoon, he was free. And according to the case prosecutors later presented, Nazia met up with Butts that day. The two reportedly traveled to Ypsilanti, west of Detroit, and came back. Butts checked into a motel. What happened next has never been publicly established minute by minute, and this documentary will not invent it. What is established is the absence. Nazia did not come home that night. The next morning, January 10th, her family reported her missing. The first investigators were the school district's own police force. Detroit Public Schools community district officers began retracing her steps, interviewing classmates, reviewing her social media, mapping her contacts, pulling at every thread a 13-year-old's day leaves behind. As those threads were pulled, the school police chief later explained, leads developed and the leads worried them. State and federal partners were contacted, the FBI.
We believe Miss Naziah Harris did not return home from school. She was a student at Clark Elementary. January 10th, her family went about the process of reporting her missing. We began our investigation at that point. We began working back, following through her on her last known steps, possible person she was in contact with, some of her school-age friends, gathering different information. As we began to work back through that information with our local, state, and federal law enforcement partners, information that we obtained has led us to this point here. At that point, we reached out to Chief White to let him know the developments that we had, and so at that point we decided that this investigation had kind of gone past the four walls of our building, and Chief White stepped in to help us out.
U.S. Marshals, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In February, after what Detroit's police chief described as a comprehensive and detailed briefing, the city police department took over the case. Chief James White did not soften the reason. We left that meeting with some very serious concerns about Naziah's safety, he told reporters. The department's message to the family was a pledge. A deputy chief promised that every possible resource would be used to bring Naziah home, and said investigators were re-examining the evidence and re-interviewing every witness and anyone with possible information. What followed was one of the more visible search efforts Detroit had seen in years. Grid searches moved block by block. Officers and volunteers walked streets, vacant lots, and wooded stretches, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, canvassing businesses. The searches were not confined to one part of the city, and officials would not say publicly what information was steering them. "We don't make assumptions," the school police chief said. "We can't speak to anything we don't know." Police commissioners and clergy stood at the same podium and spoke past the cameras to whoever might have her. "It is against the law to harbor a child," one commissioner said. "If someone is keeping her against her will, please let her go." Naziah's grandmother stood in front of the cameras and pleaded. "She's a very sweet child," she said. "This is not of her character. We have done some of everything. I want my baby home." Local 4 reported that her father, already seriously ill, spent the early months out looking for her nearly every day. That spring, the station reported, he died of heart failure. A family friend said the disappearance had pushed him over the edge. He did not live to hear a single answer. In the months that followed, Local 4 reported that a warrant request had been submitted to county prosecutors. Police would not say whom it concerned. A family friend on the police board urged patience and warned residents against searching vacant houses on their own, afraid untrained hands would compromise evidence a courtroom would one day need. Then investigators recovered something near the Rouge River in the area of 7 Mile and Berg. Clothing, items they believed belonged to Naziah, not her clothes. A discovery like that does not bring relief, and it does not bring closure. It confirms the fear a family has been carrying since the first missed curfew, that this was never a runaway case. From that point, the missing person file was a homicide investigation in everything but the press release. Chief White, asked whether the case would end the way everyone hoped, answered carefully. "It is not going to be the desired outcome that any of us want," he said, and then stopped himself mid-thought, saying the prosecutor would probably be ringing his phone. Detectives rebuilt Naziah's final day backward, hour by hour. Cell tower data, digital records, every person she had contact with in the days before she vanished, and one name kept surfacing: Jarvis Butts. Not a stranger in the shadows. A 40-something man with ties to her extended family, already inside the edges of her world. That is how cases like this usually look. The danger is rarely unknown. It is familiar. And as detectives dug into Butts, prosecutors say, they did not just find a connection to one girl. They found a history, stretching back further than the public knew, involving other young victims. What looked at first like a single missing person case was opening into something wider. Butts denied involvement. He told police he had nothing to hide and invited them to search his phone. "Go through it," he said. On the surface, the phone backed him up. Nothing obviously incriminating. So the department's digital forensic examiners went underneath the surface into the deleted data. What they recovered, according to hours of expert testimony later presented in court, changed the case. Thousands of deleted text messages between Butts and the 13-year-old restored from the device, and a deleted search history. According to the prosecutor's office, that history included searches about abortions, abortion pills, and drinking antifreeze. Prosecutors alleged Nazia was pregnant when she was killed, and that Butts was the father of the unborn child. Detectives also traced how his account of that day collided with the records. Statements the judge would later say were proven false by his own recovered messages and by witness testimony. Investigators did not need a theory about his demeanor. They had timestamps. Pause on where the case stood by the fall of 2024. Verified, a missing child, recovered clothing, and a digital trail. Alleged grooming, a pregnancy, and a killing. Unknown where Nazia was. That is the file prosecutors decided was ready. On September 27, 2024, a little over 8 months after Nazia disappeared, Wayne County prosecutors charged Jarvis Butts in connection with her murder, charging him as a fourth-time habitual offender. Alongside and after, it came the separate cases accusing him of sexually assaulting other young girls. Announcing the case, prosecutor Kim Worthy held up the last photo Nazia ever took, the smiling, waving selfie, and told reporters that the girl thought she was saying hello, but she was really saying goodbye. A charge is an accusation, not a conviction. Butts was presumed innocent, and Michigan law gave him a first courtroom test, a preliminary examination where a judge, not a jury, decides whether the evidence clears probable cause. And without a body, that hearing would have to do something unusual. It would have to prove a death. The examination unfolded at Detroit's 36th District Court across days of testimony in late 2024, concluding in January 2025. Prosecutors stacked circumstance on circumstance. In the years since January 9, 2024, there had been no texts from a girl described as texting constantly, no social media activity, no calls, no sightings. She never returned to school, and her medical records showed no condition that could explain a sudden, natural death. There was the black hoodie recovered near 7 Mile, practically new when she wore it to school that morning, according to her grandmother's testimony, found carrying her DNA, blood, and holes the judge described as consistent with a struggle, violence, or a weapon. There were the shoes her brother recognized, found in the same area, and there were eyeglasses recovered from a car connected to Butts the day after she vanished, glasses a witness said looked exactly like the pair in her final photo. The defense pushed back on the heart of it. This was, they argued, a circumstantial case. No body, no weapon, no physical evidence like bloodstains tying their client to a death. The judge agreed with the label and rejected the conclusion. Circumstantial evidence, she noted, can be sufficient for a bind-over and even for a conviction. The hearing also aired painful questions about the adults around Nazia, testimony about who noticed what and when, and why no one called police until the next morning. Testimony the judge, in her ruling, openly said she found hard to believe. On January 9, 2025, 1 year to the day after Nazia went missing, Judge Aaliyah Sabri ruled there was probable cause to believe Nazia Harris was dead, probable cause to believe she was murdered, and probable cause to send Jarvis Butts to trial. The judge read the evidence into the theory she said it supported, that Butts, believing the pregnant 13-year-old carried his child, attempted what he thought was a do-it-yourself abortion, that it went wrong, and that instead of seeking medical help, he intentionally killed her and did his best to cover it up. Then she looked past the legal standard, at the world around the child. Several people failed her, the judge said: the home, the adults, the systems that never followed through. And finally she ordered the defendant to stand and addressed him directly. "You are the monster in this whole picture." Strong words, but still only a bind-over. Probable cause is a low bar. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the mountain. The case moved up to Wayne County Circuit Court, and for another year, Nazia's family waited for a trial. Trial was set for late February 2026. It never happened. On February 12, 2026, just under 2 weeks before jury selection, Jarvis Butts appeared for a pre-trial hearing and pleaded guilty, not only in Nazia's case, in 6 cases at once. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for killing Nazia Harris, with an agreed sentence of 35 to 60 years in prison. In the 5 other cases, he pleaded guilty to counts of second- and third-degree criminal sexual conduct against other children, 10 to 15 years each, all running at the same time as the murder sentence. As part of the agreement, remaining charges were dismissed, including the sexual assault count in Nazia's own case. In the cold arithmetic of a plea deal, the abuse prosecutors described was answered through the other victims' cases and through the murder count itself. But the agreement carried one condition that mattered more to her family than the numbers. Butts was required to give a truthful statement about the location of Nazia's body. Prosecutors confirmed he gave that statement. "We are satisfied with the statement he has given," Prosecutor Kim Worthy said, adding that giving the family some semblance of closure had been one of the most important aspects of the deal. The statement's contents were never made public. One source told Local 4 that Butts admitted putting her body in the Rouge River near 7 Mile and Berg, the same area where her clothing had been found. That specific account has never been officially confirmed, and this documentary treats it as exactly what it is: a single-source report. Her adult cousin, one of the family's most public advocates, learned of the plea from a reporter's phone call. "It's almost hard to grasp," she said. "After 2 years, it seemed like it was never going to happen." 1 month later, on March 12, 2026, Butts stood before Judge Nicholas Hathaway in Wayne County's 3rd Circuit Court in a green jail uniform and a paper mask, with extra officers ringing the room. 7 victim impact statements were read. Relatives sobbed through prepared remarks. An attorney finished one statement a family member could not. Twice people were escorted out after outbursts from the gallery. The theme running through the family's words was what 2 years of grief, stress, and financial strain had taken from all of them. The sentence followed the agreement: 35 to 60 years for second-degree murder, with credit for time served, plus the concurrent terms in the other 5 cases. No parole eligibility for 35 years. State records listed his earliest possible release date: September 26, 2059. Jarvis Butts was 43 years old. For a moment, the case looked finished: a conviction, a sentence measured in decades, a statement sitting in investigators' hands about where Nazia was. It lasted 2 weeks. On the morning of March 26, 2026, staff at the Charles Eagler Reception and Guidance Center, the state prison intake facility in Jackson, Michigan, found Butts unresponsive in his cell. Staff attempted life-saving measures. They were unsuccessful. The Michigan Department of Corrections reported the death as a suicide. Michigan State Police opened an investigation, which is standard for any death in custody. As of the most recent public reporting, that remains the official account, and this documentary will add no detail beyond it. What matters here is the consequence. 2 weeks into a 35-year minimum, whatever else Jarvis Butts knew about that January day, about exactly where Nazia is, can no longer be asked of him. So where does that leave this case? Legally, it is over. The man who admitted killing Nazia Harris was convicted and sentenced, and 5 other children's cases were answered, at least in the way a courtroom can answer them. But the Detroit Police Department has been explicit that the search for Nazia herself is not over. Investigators say they are continuing to pursue every lead toward recovering her remains. As of early August 2026, no recovery has been publicly announced. Her family is still waiting to lay her to rest, still waiting, in their word, for a homecoming. Reporters covering this case kept returning to a wider fact about the city. When they asked how many people were missing in Detroit at that moment, the department could not immediately produce a number because it kept changing. Behind this one name sit many families, still waiting for theirs. And the questions that outlast the verdict are bigger than one man. They start in April 2022 with a written warning that named a child and sat unactioned inside a police department. The department has acknowledged the failure and says its process is different now. Every name in every notification contacted. Nazia's relatives ask the harder question: how many other names in how many other reports were never contacted at all? Asked whether he worried there were other cases like this one, the assistant chief answered honestly, "Of course. If this case leaves you with one practical thing, let it be the boring bureaucratic one. When a child names an abuser, every system that hears it, family, school, agency, police, has to treat follow-through as the whole job. In this case, by the account of a judge, a police department..."
For being here. I want to just start off before I bring up Chief Jackson from Detroit Public Schools Police Department and to what brought us here today. On February 12th, we had a briefing on this missing child. Yesterday, we had a much more comprehensive and detailed meeting where he brought forth a number of different factors as to what occurred and what they have been working on.
And a grieving family. Follow-through is exactly what failed. Her family remembers a girl, not a case file, a sweet child, a kid who talked about ice cream trucks and riding her bike, a 13-year-old who got off the bus a few blocks from home the way she had 100 times and deserved to walk through the door. If you have information about the location of Nazia Harris's remains, contact the Detroit Police Department or call Crime Stoppers of Michigan at 1-800-SPEAK-UP, where tips can be left anonymously. As of this recording, that information matters more than anything else in this video. A question for the comments, and keep it to the record. Which documented failure in this case do you think mattered most, and what would real accountability for it look like? Please be respectful, and do not attempt to contact anyone connected to this case. If you value careful, evidence-led true crime storytelling, subscribe to this channel. Sources and verified updates for this case are listed in the description. And because this story touches on suicide, if you or someone you know is struggling, in the United States you can call or text 988 anytime to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Her name was Nazia Harris. Until her family can bring her home, her name is the point. Say it and remember it.